I bet all of you have heard of a little thing called a culture war. It's this little thing that's been ongoing for a while now, a decade, and some change probably. And it has many fronts indeed. And I've also always been of the view that politics ultimately, and its expression, is subordinate to culture. And culture itself is subordinate to a confluence of genes and environment, but that's a separate discussion. So, politics and the directions that politics tends to move in is largely decided by the current day culture. For example, bills or laws that are passed will reflect what the cultural values of a given place, time, country, etc., might be. So, if people are really concerned about long-term change in terms of politics and what have you, they need to be focused on the culture, at least theoretically. And this is also why, generally speaking, I don't assign a tremendous amount of value to politicking itself and engaging in politics. Because unless things in the culture change, then you might as well just be blowing bubbles into a hurricane. Nothing much is going to come of it. And as I said, there are many fronts of the so-called culture war. But some of those fronts are so far gone, they don't seem to be winnable necessarily. We'll get back to that later. I have been observing of late, and by of late, in recent months really, very recently, that there have emerged certain cracks and crevices in aspects of the culture war that I think are actually positive in the sense of them pushing forward and moving forward in a way that's beneficial to what most people who are sensible and normal can appreciate. One of the things we can observe in the culture war is its manifestation in media. Social media, yes, but also games, films, the media we consume. As many of you know, I'm a big proponent of escapism. I think in this dark world we live in, escapism is one of the few temporary outs that we have. And unfortunately, escapism has been at the forefront of the culture war, and the culture warriors, the other side as it were, have been doing their best to nail the coffin shut on that front, and doing their best to basically make entertainment, films, video games, and the like essentially unenjoyable and just terrible, and to inject their ideology and philosophy into everything that they touch. You might have heard, for example, of a consulting firm called Sweet Baby Inc. They basically consult various game developers, supposedly consult, which is to say they try to inject various things like DEI and strong forms of progressive philosophy and ideology into games. And what Sweet Baby Inc. touches, for example, tends to just fail, disintegrate, and do miserably. And this has been the case for a long time. It's not just Sweet Baby Inc., by the way. There are a lot of these progressive DEI consultancy firms that do similar things, and they basically turn games that might have been okay or even good, potentially, into gunk and junk. What has been changing in recent months, not even recent years? There's been a change in the wind, so to speak, gentlemen. There's been a change in the sense that finally, to some degree at least, the purported axiom of if you go woke, you go broke, this actually seems to have some currency at this stage. Now, that wasn't always the case, but on the other hand, there were a lot of woke productions that were taking many financial hits and just being ignored, possibly due to financial support and injections from institutions like BlackRock. But if you look at the failures last year in terms of entertainment, various games like Concord, Dustborn, etc., you'll notice, and even now, by the way, something like Overwatch by Blizzard, these games are not doing very well. What is doing very well right now? Well, Marvel Rivals, a PvP shooter game that has certain elements that make the game very appealing, apart from good gameplay, apparently. If you look at the aesthetics of the characters, both the men and the women, Marvel superheroes, they all look really good with no exception. And so, what I'm talking about here is, in the beginning at least, the war of aesthetics. Aesthetics are important in every genre you can consider. The aesthetics of a film make or break the film, and the aesthetics of a game can, not always, but can make or break a game too. And so what we're observing now is a change in the atmosphere simply by dint of the fact that this game, Marvel Rivals, is making bank because people are willing to shell out tons of money on skins that look cool and are appealing on characters that are already aesthetic and nice to look at. And in response to this, you'll hear a lot of things like Gooner skins. Well, as I might suggest, I think we're all gooners now. A lot of the pushback against what has traditionally been considered good aesthetics has been predicated on nonsense like you have to avoid the male gaze, and the general claim that what most straight male gamers want is in fact toxic, bad, and just harmful. Well, Marvel Rivals, as a game standing on its own, seems to disprove this. Hell, even I've been tempted to try the game out as free to play, just because I think Thor looks really cool in the game. But despite having played Overwatch in the past, I don't think Marvel Rivals is necessarily my type of game, but I respect the hustle and I respect, above all, the aesthetics. Because when we're talking about game failures, really, the aesthetics is the first area where it fails. Why? Because it's the most obvious thing you see. A game can have terrible writing, it can have terrible plot, the gameplay could be terrible, but what do you see first? You see the things you see with your own eyes. And if it's unappealing, that can serve as an instant turnoff and probably will turn away customers. The so-called Overwatch competitor, Concord, was shut down within a week, basically. It had a few hundred people playing it compared to hundreds of thousands of people playing Marvel Rivals. And probably the biggest part of that was the aesthetics. At the time, the usual suspects were claiming, well, it's just because the market isn't interested in another PvP game similar to Overwatch. But Marvel Rivals has disproven this thoroughly. So, when I say I see cracks emerge in the so-called culture war, what I'm saying is it is beginning on the front of aesthetics, and it might change in other ways too. And the best way to look at this is really within the realm of video games. Now, I know some of you are not gamers at all, but even if you're not a gamer, you should really pay attention to some of this stuff, because this is the domain where culture will change, I think, gradually. Now, I am not claiming, like a lot of people are wont to claim, and you've probably heard a million times, that we finally hit peak woke. We have definitely not hit peak woke. Peak woke is a term that has been bandied about quite a lot since roughly 2018, maybe even 2017, and it has never proven itself true. And we probably never will be able to offer an analysis where we say, oh, we're now officially in peak woke. But what we can say is, even if we're not in peak woke, the cracks are emerging, and there has been some pushback. Now, it's no coincidence, by the way, that the developer making this game, NetEase, is a Chinese developer. And in China, they don't give a flying monkey's buttocks about the culture war, and they certainly don't care about progressive values. They made a game that they knew probably would appeal to the majority of gamers who are straight men. End of story. That's just how it is. And they've done it exceptionally well by all accounts. Like I said, I've been tempted to try the game out just based off the aesthetics of the heroes. Now, you might see, going forward in the future, how things pan out, a shift away from Western entertainment and media more towards the East. In fact, you could argue we've already seen that. Last year, there was Black Myth Wukong, a fighting game based on original Chinese mythology that has done exceptionally well. People all over the world, especially in the West, praised it unanimously. And people already have been singing the praises of Japanese games for a long time, although allegedly the quality's gone down there too. But in general, a move away from Western media and entertainment is a sign that people in the West are kind of fed up with the slop that we've been fed, in part because of the aesthetics, but also in part because of the quality. Aesthetics are often the harbinger of something else. So if the aesthetics are really poor, there's a high likelihood in a game or even a film that the writing will be poor. And in a game also that the gameplay will be poor. Because if people aren't talented enough to make characters look good, what is the likelihood that they're talented enough to make games fun and or have a coherent and believable story? And or have a coherent, believable story that also is appealing? I reckon very, very slim chances indeed. So basically what I'm saying is long term, I think things are changing. Again, not peak woke, definitely not. But the cracks are emerging, slowly but surely. It will probably take a while, I think around the order of a decade maybe even longer, for all the changes to take place. But these cracks are emerging, And the overwhelming preference of most gamers who are straight men is emerging again. And because of the almighty dollar or the yuan or whatever currency you want to look at, the reality is that in order to make money, gamers, and I would argue also filmmakers and people who make series, need to appeal to what actually makes them money. And in most cases, it's going to be straight men who have certain preferences that don't coincide with other people's preferences. Certainly not with progressives, but also certainly not with women's preferences. There was some controversy around some skins, as I mentioned, in Marvel Rivals, with a bunch of women calling Invisible Woman's skin, which is based on the comic book Goonerbait. And gooning, as many of you might know, is this prolonged trance-like state of wanking off, basically. But it doesn't really matter because that's what men like. They like to look at it. And if you put things like that out there, men are going to spend money. So it's pretty simple. And I think also within the culture war, things like games and entertainment are probably the only front where we, the consumer, actually have a direct say in how things go, because we can basically vote, as it were, with our wallets. Of course, you can vote for politicians until you're blue in the face, but you're not necessarily voting for change or things that you want. You're just hoping that maybe the politician does something. Like with Mr. Drumpf. Let's see if he actually does anything that he promised, right? On the other hand, if you don't want to spend your money because you think it's slop or it looks terrible or it doesn't look fun, well, you can do that. And if enough people do that just because it's a universal consensus that something is slop, then the makers of that game or film will suffer because it is unappealing and it is not what you wanted. And so we need to start with small steps, of course, as always. But I find it odd that the people who are so obsessed with the culture war and talking about high-minded politics and political philosophy and what have you are not looking at the domains that are most easily influenced by average people, and specifically average men. And that is, to some degree, films and series, but to the greatest degree, games. So whether you're a gamer or not, this is where the so-called culture war could potentially be won in the not-too-distant future. And I think, as I said, we're seeing cracks, we're seeing little wins here and there, and I think given enough time, not immediately, not anytime soon, but given enough time, you will see a shift in the gaming industry, which itself could be a harbinger of things to come long-term in other areas of the culture. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my very generous patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. You keep the channel alive. Without you, the channel simply could not exist. Thank you so much. And if you can hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos, it would be much appreciated. Leave a like, sub if you're not yet subbed to my channel, comment, share the video. Much appreciated. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Goodbye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.